Oh. Hi?
Is Tamara here?
Joke's on you, I would never open the door to any stranger because I watched The Safe Side Stranger Safety as a kid, and I learned from Safe Side Super Chick not to open the door to strangers, especially those in a gorilla suit. Now, released in 2008, The Strangers gives us an unsettling home invasion story based on a few real-life events, including the 1969 Tate Murders committed by members of the Manson family. In the film, a family of strangers, including the masked man, the older female pinup, and the younger female dollface, torments a couple in the early hours of the morning, and the reason they give for their actions has haunted me every time someone knocks on my door.
Why are you doing this to us? Because you were home.
Anyways, in today's video, we're going to take a look at everyone who dies, and if they could have lived in The Strangers. After a proposal gone wrong, our protagonists, James and Kristen, return to their vacation home and have an awkward evening until a stranger knocks on the door around 4 in the morning. The stranger is a girl who asks if Tamara is there. When the couple says no, she leaves and the two question the interaction for a moment before passing it off as nothing. James then goes out to buy cigarettes for Kristen, and while he's gone, a female stranger returns asking again for Tamara. Kristen tells the girl that she'd already been to their house, and slightly disturbed by the encounter, she looks around until the fireplace causes a smoke detector to go off. While trying to turn off the alarm, she drops the smoke detector on the floor and then becomes distracted by a loud banging on the door. She calls James to let him know that the girl returned and asks him to come back quickly and to stay on the phone with her, but he hangs up. Good move, James. And we can see a masked man watching her from a dark corner of the house. Kristen then hears a door close and calls out for James. When she doesn't receive an answer, she arms herself with a kitchen knife and goes for the house phone, but it doesn't work. She then notices that the smoke detector was moved from the floor to a chair and knows that someone has been inside with her. A little later, she is jump scared by the masked man outside, and the door to the house is unlocked and cracked open. She slowly approaches it, and when a masked woman appears, she slams the door shut. There's a rather tense scene as Kristen tries to hide from the strangers, and the tension is broken up when James returns to the house and searches it, revealing no strangers inside. James then goes outside to grab his phone from the car, only to find it severely damaged with flat tires. When he returns to the house, he and Kristen find his cell phone inside, indicating that the strangers are still there, and a struggle to secure an area ensues. The two are rather resourceful here, and they try pretty much everything I would think to do. They arm themselves with knives and a shotgun. They try escaping in the car, but are hit by the strangers in their car. And they try barricading the house by moving heavy furniture in front of the door. Eventually, they take refuge in a storage room and point the shotgun at the door, prepared to shoot. Shortly after, James's friend Mike, who he had called to pick him up after the failed proposal, shows up. The strangers throw a rock at his car, and he approaches the house, taking note of the damage to James's car and the house. Because of this, he arms himself with a metal bar before entering. While looking around, the male stranger sneaks up behind Mike, but as he enters the line of sight of the storage room door, James shoots before realizing who is there, leaving Mike to become the first to die in The Strangers. I think Mike's approach to entering the home was rather reasonable. But my biggest criticism is that he didn't call for help after realizing something was wrong outside. Furthermore, I think his reaction to something being thrown through his windshield was a little less intense than it should have been. I mean, if that happened to me, I'd be driving out of there as fast as possible. It was a clear sign that whatever caused the damage Mike was seeing was still there. That danger is still present. Anyways, once Mike was inside of the house, James's reaction to the appearance of someone in the doorway was so fast that I do not think that there is any hope at that point. I completely understand why James shot at the first sign of any person. I mean, that's what I do when I play video games and get scared. And so I think that once he is inside of the house, the only thing that could have saved Mike would be if he had called out sooner. However, I also understand why he didn't. At this point in the film, while we know the strangers are aware of Mike's position, he doesn't. so perhaps in his mind calling out is a risky move. But he does it anyway right before he's shot, so maybe it isn't entirely unlikely. In the end, while I'm a bit on the fence because his death is so sudden and brutal, I think that there were plenty of clear warnings that Mike should have taken as a reason to leave and get help. He wasn't completely idiotic in his investigation of the house, so I'd say he had his wits about him and absolutely should have and could have left. Meaning that Mike could have lived. After Mike's death, James and Kristen began to falter. The two are traumatized by what occurred, resulting in them seemingly forgetting about the strangers for a moment as they run out into the hallway and walk around the house. The two then make several poor decisions with their clouded minds as James tells Kristen to stay in the house while he goes outside for an old radio in the barn to call for help. Now, this is such a silly thing to me because it is very clear at this point that the house is in no way a safe space, and the two of them are just endangering themselves more by splitting up. I think separating was James and Kristen's fatal mistake. There were 3 strangers and 2 of them, so they were not entirely outnumbered. And they also had a gun, so I think they could have made a much better stand together. Anyways, James ends up encountering the strangers outside, but is run up on by the male stranger, and before we can see what happens, the scene cuts to Kristen, who eventually runs out of the house, but trips in a ditch and screws her leg up pretty badly. She then makes it to the barn and the old radio, which she uses to contact help, but before she can share her location, Pinup breaks the radio. She ends up back in the house and hides in a closet, but is eventually found by Dollface. James is then thrown into the house by the masked man, and he also does not appear to be in good shape. The two no longer have their original weapons and are knocked down and dragged into the living room where they are tied up. The strangers then wait for the daylight, remove their masks, and slowly stab the two to death. Now, I've been struggling with what to say about James's death, mostly because more than half of it occurs off camera. After he is stabbed the first few times, the scene cuts to black and we don't see the strangers deal their fatal blows. We are also in the dark about what occurred between James's encounter with the strangers in the woods and when he's tied up, except for the brief period where the male stranger pushes him inside. From what we do see, after leaving Kristen and going outside to reach the radio in the shed, James notices Pinup near the shed and ducks for cover. He then aims his gun at her, but the male stranger runs up behind him. While splitting up from Kristen was probably a mistake here, James had a logical reason for going outside and performed well under the circumstances. While the male stranger runs up to James fast, he still manages to get a shot off at the stranger. After this, we have no information until James is thrown inside the house. After that, Kristen runs and we don't see James again until the two are tied up, but we do hear him yelling for Kristen to run a few times, indicating that he is conscious during this whole process. It's just difficult because we can't see if he attempts to fight back or what he may have at his disposal. Once he's tied up by the strangers, he is at a major disadvantage, and there doesn't seem to be any hope. But then again, he doesn't even attempt to struggle or free himself. While Kristen struggles, James just sits there. I think that this is an indication that his spirit was absolutely gutted by Mike's death and everything that had occurred. So maybe he had the physical strength to do something, but he had no fight left in him. In the end, I think James is just incredibly traumatized by accidentally killing his best friend, and so after that point, his mind is really struggling to focus and make decisions. There was still some logic behind the decisions that he made, and while we didn't see much of his final fight, it is clear that he made somewhat of an effort in the struggle outside, and that after that, he appeared to give up. While I'm very torn about how James and Kristen split up, I think that action is just too far away from the time that they die for me to consider too heavily. It's not like they were in a busy neighborhood or anything. Help was very far away, and they had essentially no way of reaching it. And so I'm going to say that James's death is slated. As it turns out, Kristen is still alive at the end of the film. When two boys arrive at the house to hand out religious pamphlets, they find Kristen and James on the ground, and when one of the boys reaches out for Kristen, she screams. However, there is some speculation that she dies right after that, as these boys are also featured at the start of the film, calling emergency services, and a narrator explains, quote, "The brutal events that took place there are still not entirely known," end quote, which could indicate that Kristen did not live to tell the tale. But since we don't see this happen, and since Kristen proved herself to be a fighter to the very end, holding onto the walls as the masked man dragged her down the hallway, and struggling against her restraints in the chair, I'm going to say that this is a unique situation that deserves an all-around unclear. All in all, The Strangers leaves us with only 2 clear deaths, and of the dead, one could have lived and the other was slated. While The Strangers did not give us many deaths to work with, the next film in the series, The Strangers Prey at Night, gives us a bit more, so stay tuned for my video on that. Anyways, thank you all for watching today's video. If you have any thoughts to add, or movies you'd like me to take a look at next, leave a comment below. Also, please consider leaving a like and subscribe to support me. As always, be good people, love others, and take care of yourselves. Peace.